What's up, world? I'm Cameron McKinney, and this is Pop Culture Spotlight, a podcast on the movie Love Lies Bleeding. Here's a quick synopsis. Lou, a gym manager, falls for Jackie, a bodybuilder who just got a job working for Lou's estranged father. The film stars Kristen Stewart, Katie O'Brien, Ed Harris, Jenna Malone, and Dave Franco. Standout performances. Kristen Stewart may not be at the height of her popularity. That occurred during the Twilight years, but she is at the absolute pinnacle of her craft, and you would agree with me if you've seen her last 3 performances. First was Spencer, where she played Princess Diana. I think she should have won the Oscar for that role, but her getting a nomination was enough. Then you had Crimes of the Future, which showed her humorous side. It's arguably the best supporting performance of her career, and that gets us to Lou in Love Lies Bleeding. Lou is someone who hasn't left home because she's protective of her sister who's in an abusive relationship. I think it's one of the best performances of Stewart's career, and my thoughts on her career are this. Early on, it seemed like Kristen Stewart was a typical movie star, like she was going to have that typical movie star trajectory where she was going to bring herself to every single role she played. And instead of that, she's become a real chameleon. She is a movie star and she's good at that, but she's also a phenomenal actress. Here's what Kristen Stewart herself told Empire's Sophie Butcher about what made her want to play Lou. Quote, "This girl in particular would normally never be the protagonist in a film. She would be the weird friend that underlined some kind of otherness that was not at the forefront. She's invisible. She doesn't exist for anyone but herself. When she sees Jackie, it's so audacious, it's so gross, it's so icky to everyone that she's used to. There's just something that all of a sudden stirs the pot and you're like, oh, this pot is filled with so much muck. All she wants to do is have a good time with a girl and not think about any of those things. But they're all coming for her. All of her familiar violence and history, it's not going to go away. Maybe the reason it's fun for me to be in this is because I am such a runner. I really don't like to stop. I like that forward motion. And so it feels like that stuckness is really opposed to my nature. You feel like you want this girl to emotionally Heimlich maneuver herself into being. It's just satisfying." End quote. Stewart's upcoming films include Love Me with Steven Yeun and Sacramento with Michael Cera and Maya Erskine, directed by Michael Angarano, who was Stewart's co-star on one of her earliest films, Speak. Kristen Stewart right now is definitely in indie movie mode and working with good filmmakers. I just wonder if she'll ever be in a mainstream studio movie ever again after the failure of Charlie's Angels. I mean, personally, I would love to see her in a film directed by Greta Gerwig and Sofia Coppola that a lot of people see, because I still feel that Kristen Stewart is massively underrated. I mean, I look at what The Batman has done for Robert Pattinson. It made people finally realize what a good actor that guy is. And I want Kristen Stewart to be given that same kind of movie that everyone sees and goes, wow, this is one of the best actors on the planet, because I personally believe that Kristen Stewart is one of the best actors on planet Earth. Stewart's co-star Katie O'Brien plays Jackie, a bodybuilder who has a dream and things get in the way and she doesn't react so well. I personally love how complicated this character is. She's angry and overprotective. This is definitely a breakout performance from O'Brien. And she has not one but 2 big upcoming movies, Twisters and the 8th Mission Impossible movie, and after watching her in Love Lies Bleeding, I can perfectly envision her in an action movie with Tom Cruise. One of the reasons I really wanted to watch this movie is because it has Ed Harris, and Ed Harris is an actor I've always been a fan of. He's got an all-time great filmography with The Right Stuff, one of the best movies about pilots, State of Grace, an underrated film with 3 of the best actors ever, Sean Penn, Gary Oldman, and of course Harris. Glengarry Glen Ross, a movie with one of the best cast ever. The Firm, where he's got some great scenes with Tom Cruise. Apollo 13, the movie that garnered him his first Oscar nomination. The Rock, his performance in that is the best performance ever in a Michael Bay movie. The Truman Show, a movie that was way ahead of its time and for which Harris got another Oscar nomination. And his performance in Love Lies Bleeding feels like a classic Ed Harris Harris part. He's playing an imposing, in-your-face, vile figure who views himself as the good guy. He's also just one of those actors that has a signature voice. Like, we all know Ed Harris because of his voice. Yes, we all know what he looks like, but when you hear his voice, you know it's Ed Harris. Harris has upcoming roles in the movies Riff Raff with Jennifer Coolidge, Bill Murray, and Pete Davidson, and Huntington with Glenn Powell and Margaret Qualley. The director of Love Lies Bleeding is Rose Glass, whose first film was the critical hit Same Mod, a horror film, and as important as it is to make a good first movie, it's even more important to make a good, noteworthy sophomore film, and that's where the all-time greats start to make a name for themselves. I mean, the first one that comes to mind has to be the Coen brothers with Raising Arizona. They, like Glass, were coming off of a horror movie, and instead of making another one of those, they made a zany comedy with all-time performances from Nicolas Cage and Holly Hunter. David Fincher's second movie is a bit different because he was coming off of a movie that was not beloved, Aliens Free, but his second movie is Seven, which is still one of the best movies of his illustrious filmography. I mean, that movie has the best performances I've seen from Morgan Freeman and maybe Brad Pitt. I mean, I love Brad Pitt in Moneyball, but at the end of the day, his best acting might have been in the movie Seven. The what's in the box moment is going to live the test of time. Damien Chazelle's sophomore film was Whiplash, and that's a movie that has one of the best endings ever, and it's also a movie that grows on me every single time I've seen it. I mean, it just grows in my estimation, and of course it has great performances from both Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. And finally, I think you could make a real argument that the best sophomore film of all time is Sofia Coppola's Lost in Translation. Here's a director who gets one of the biggest stars on the planet to star in this little indie film. She gets Bill Murray and pairs him with Scarlett Johansson, who has not yet become the Marvel star she's going to become in the future. What I personally find so interesting about a director's second movie is usually a director gets to work with a bigger movie star during their second movie. Like I just said, Sofia Coppola got to work with Bill Murray. David Fincher was working with Morgan Freeman. Robert Eggers is another great example. In his second movie, he was working with an all-time great actor in Willem Dafoe and a budding movie star with Robert Pattinson on The Lighthouse. And with getting these movie stars to be in your movies also adds more pressure, because these movie stars being in your film is going to get more eyeballs on the movie and get a wider audience. I'm sure a lot of people like myself watched Love Lies Bleeding because Kristen Stewart is the star of the movie and it also has Ed Harris in it. I just think it's a big test for a director to work with big movie stars, because I think they have to get the best out of them, because like it or not, movie stars kind of dictate the future careers that directors are going to have, because actresses like Kristen Stewart can get movies made by signing on to them. Ed Harris being a supporting character in your movie is going to help get the movie made because of his history being in really good movies. And Rose Glass in Love Lies Bleeding really aced the test of working with movie stars. Again, she got one of the best performances out of Kristen Stewart in her career, and she was able to get a classic Ed Harris performance in this film as well. I know we all love it when a new movie star emerges because we're thinking about all the movies they're going to star in. I get just as excited when I watch a new filmmaker I've never seen before make a movie like this, because now I'm really excited about where Rose Glass's career is going to go from here. I also love the fact that while her movie is a bigger scale than her first film, it's not a big studio movie. I mean, we've seen it time and time again. Young indie filmmakers make a good movie that a lot of people see, and then they make the big Star Wars movie or the Marvel movie or the Jurassic Park movie, and they kind kind of lose who they are as filmmakers because they get swept up in the big blockbuster business. And I love blockbusters as much as the next guy, but I also want to see new original voices. And Rose Glass appears to be a new original voice. Let her make movies like Love Lies Bleeding with the likes of Kristen Stewart. I don't need to see her version of a Star Wars movie. I don't need to see her version of a Marvel movie. I want to see a Rose Glass movie. Throughout most of Love Lies Bleeding, it feels like a normal thriller movie in a good way, but there is also a mix of surrealism that I don't want to spoil. I just want to say it added to the overall film because it left you wondering, what is this really saying? There's like a deepness to the movie. I like watching a movie and going, what am I supposed to get out of this without it being an obvious answer? I like that. I don't love to be spoon-fed, and I feel like we do get that way too much in movies nowadays, where it's, here's my movie, this is what it's about, and enjoy it. I like a movie with a deeper meaning to it, and I feel like there is a deeper meaning to the movie Love Lies Bleeding than I even understand right now. I like a movie that I have to watch a few times before I really get it. And there's a lot of elements that make this movie work. It has a good plot, romance, and a fast pace, but the strongest element in a movie like this is the chemistry between the two stars. That has to work. I look at a movie like Drive. If Ryan Gosling and Carey Mulligan didn't have chemistry, you wouldn't care a lick about that all-time great elevator sequence, but because those two had undeniable chemistry, that movie lives on. And I feel the exact same way about Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien. Their chemistry is going to make this movie live on. People are going to watch this movie and go, I want to see them in other movies together. That's what makes a movie work, is chemistry. I know people get bored talking about it when it comes to romantic comedies and other films. I get it because it's hard to describe, but when you're watching it, it is undeniable, and you can see that in Love Lies Bleeding. It relies on the chemistry of the two actresses. I was also fascinated by the movie's depiction of steroids. I have never seen a movie like this really tackle that issue. I mean, the character of Jackie uses steroids and becomes a violent figure who is confused at times as well. I mean, I've never seen it. I mean, we talked about the topic all of the time because of what was happening in sports like baseball, like the effects. Like, all we really knew is, oh, Barry Bonds got a huge head because he used steroids. And we all kind of get the idea that it makes you angry, but I've never seen it depicted like this, like it was in this movie. And the way it was used made you feel real empathy towards the character because you know she's not really like this. Then she started to use this and she became a different, more violent person, overprotective at times, and really in her own mind. I thought the use of steroids in this movie was both thoughtful and cinematic. Like, it actually added to the plot of the movie. Oscar chances. I want to live in a world where a movie like this can get Kristen Stewart her second Oscar nomination. Like, I feel like that's something that should happen. She got her first Oscar because of Spencer, and now she's giving another brilliant leading performance that's very different than the first Oscar nomination. Those are the kind of things that should get you a second Oscar nomination. I, though, have absolutely no feel of the kind of performances the Academy likes to nominate for leading actress. I mean, I personally feel like the Academy can be obvious and mysterious at the same time. Like, I was blown away by Emma Stone in Poor Things. Her winning the Oscar made 1,000% sense to me, but I just don't know the factors that get you an Oscar nomination. I feel like a lot of people saw that movie. Emma Stone is a person who had won an Oscar before that. I'm sure that helped her case. I don't know what would help Kristen Stewart get an Oscar nomination from Love Lies Bleeding. I don't know the amount of people that have seen this movie, and I don't know how people will feel about this movie during awards season. But I'll say this, I find it very hard to believe that by the end of this year, I will see 5 better leading actresses' performances than Kristen Stewart in Love Lies Bleeding. I will say this about Kristen Stewart, I feel like she doesn't get a lot of awards recognition because her biggest strength isn't the thing that most people get awarded for, which is for talking a lot and movies. I mean, dialogue is critical when it comes to who gets awards. I mean, Emma Stone in Poor Things had a lot of great dialogue. She was very funny in the movie. It was an obvious awards type performance. But Kristen Stewart is subtle. She doesn't talk a lot in her movies. She's not super chatty. She's emotive. And I feel like that kind of acting doesn't always get awarded properly. And that's why I was kind of blown away that that kind of acting actually got recognized for the movie Spencer. I just hope the same thing can happen for this performance in Love Lies Bleeding. It's not an obvious awards contender. She doesn't have a great speech. She doesn't have amazing dialogue. You just watch it and you go, she's a natural performer. You feel the emotions that her character is feeling in the movie. Again, it's kind of hard to talk about these things because it's still so early in the movie season of the year, but I would love to see Rose Glass get a nomination for the screenplay or possibly even directing. Like, I just don't think a movie like this should be counted out because it's an indie movie. And I feel like that's kind of where Hollywood is headed, that the only indie movies that get recognized are the ones that are made by already esteemed filmmakers. And I feel like I've said this a million times on this podcast. I think the point of having the Academy Awards is to recognize movies like Love Lies Bleeding, to get people to see it, to get people to seek it out, to get people to become fans of Kristen Stewart and Rose Glass, because that is how you get them to become bigger names. It is in Hollywood's best interest for Kristen Stewart to be an actress that everyone sees a lot of her movies, for her to become a bigger and bigger movie star. And it is in Hollywood's best interest for Rose Glass to become a filmmaker that everyone talks about, because you want movies to become popular. I do think that is the funny thing about recognizing movies that have made $1 billion. Like, they don't need more notoriety. The movies that need more notoriety are movies like Love Lies Bleeding that isn't going to get a lot of numbers at the box office. But then further on, you grow out of this movie, and then the careers of these people can grow in the future. I don't know, it just feels like we're in a really weird place when it comes to movies. Okay, so this is a movie that has Kristen Stewart, somebody who has been in really big movies. Ed Harris, a guy who, like I said earlier, has a great filmography. Everyone's seen most of his movies. Jenna Malone, who had a big part in the Hunger Games series, and Dave Franco, a guy who a lot of people like. He was in the 21 Jump Street movies. He was in the Neighbor movies. I mean, people have seen a lot of movies that have starred Dave Franco. Yet all of these names come together and the movie only makes $11 million. I mean, what is that about? Is it because when you don't hear about a movie, you immediately think, oh, it'll just be like a streaming movie that I can see in a week? I mean, I really wasn't hearing a lot of hype around this movie. I mean, I only heard about it and cared about it because it starred Kristen Stewart and because of Ed Harris's involvement, because they are two actors I really like. But it doesn't feel like most people are on the same wavelength as that they're not seeking out these actors like they used to before. Like, I know there are so many people who back in the day would watch anything that starred Will Smith, no matter what it was. And I know that's a bad example because Will Smith is out here making really big movies. I think a better example is Brad Pitt. People would go wherever Brad Pitt was willing to go, and he went in a lot of weird directions. He wasn't always making bigger movies. I mean, the guy starred in 12 Monkeys with Bruce Willis. I mean, that is a weird film, yet people went there with him and seek that movie out because of Brad Pitt's involvement. And I know Kristen Stewart is nowhere near as big of a name, but I just find it kind of odd that she's nowhere near that for people, that people are not seeking her out like they would back in the day when a big star does a smaller movie like that gets a lot of attention. I mean, listen, this movie has a 95% Rotten Tomatoes score. Make that what you will. I don't know what that really means. I think it is a great movie that's definitely worth watching, and one that I think most people would enjoy. On top of all that, it's a really exciting thriller. I mean, how many of those get made nowadays? If you love suspense, you're going to love Love Lies Bleeding. And finally, you should just watch the movie if you, like me, care about the arc of Kristen Stewart's career. I mean, that's what I love the most about movies is seeing where somebody's career path goes down, and her career path has been really great lately. She has been on a great run, and in my opinion, deserves more praise for it. Thanks for listening to this edition of Pop Culture Spotlight. I'm Cameron McKinney, and there'll be a new episode of the podcast every Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I highly recommend you check out Love Lies Bleeding. Next week on the podcast, it's a big one. I'm talking about Jeff Nichols' The Bike Riders, starring Austin Butler, Jodie Comer, Tom Hardy, Michael Shannon, and Mike Feist. So tune into that and please rate, review, and subscribe.